how do you actually apply all the personal development, esoteric, and mystical teachings into your real life?
Maybe you've heard about astrology or human design or Taoism or the Kabbalah. Now, let's bring these ideas back to the human experience,
finding their edges and applications so that we can engage in life in the most expansive and embodied way.
This is the Mystical Human Podcast. Welcome back. And today we are going to be talking about how to get out of any power struggle. So really shifting from fighting against to fighting for, getting on the same team, whether that's with coworkers, your partners, friends, or even your kids. And I think this is a pretty common energy coming up for people right now.
Yes, astrologically, we have two really big aspects that are kind of pushing us towards transformation. One is that Mars, which is that god of desire, drive, passion, and war, is on top of Uranus, who is mad scientist transformation energy. So that's going to be intense, as well as Venus opposite Pluto, which is going to push us towards really redefining our relationships, which can be an uncomfortable topic when it comes to power and love.
Yeah, Pluto is all about that death and rebirth. So I'm watching this play out right now with like people around me in my life, and I had mine very recently too, where it has been this death of old ways of relationships to ourselves, love stories that we had told ourselves that gave us a lot of comfort and felt like warm blankets. It's like that blanket is literally being pulled off of people in that warm, cozy bed that they were just in. And I think in like the next week or so, there's also Capricorn full moon in Leo, which adds just a level of seriousness. So some of these power struggles we might be facing feel a little bit heavier. We don't have the same levity and being able to maybe laugh at, find the humor in some of them. So that's definitely going to be the challenge as you're shifting through all of this stuff and starting to witness where maybe you are fighting against, whether it's fighting against letting go of your own old story, your own way of relating to yourself internally, your kids, your significant other, your boss, your coworker. That fiery energy is going to probably be coming up. If it hasn't already, it will in the next week or two.
There's also a lot of fixed energy coming up in this because Mars is conjunct Uranus and Taurus, and Venus is opposing Pluto, which is in Aquarius and Leo. All of that is fixed energy. So there's a lot of people that are going to want to sit in their own corners and cling to their own realities and cling to their own expectations and wanting to make the other person wrong. So how do we actually not do that?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So how do we not do that?
This is actually something that's been very alive in my life as well, and I've witnessed it in other people's. And one of my teachers shared with me this concept of actually how do you fight for something versus fighting against something? That's a beautiful question I like to ask myself in the heated moments. Am I fighting against this person that I love, or am I actually fighting for something I want? Meaning, am I fighting for repair? Am I fighting for a healthy relationship? Am I fighting for understanding? Am I fighting for connection? Or am I just fighting to fight? Do I just want to be right?
Yes, because sometimes we just want to hear the sound of our own voice. But more seriously, like how we use that a lot in our house and our family is, especially when I notice like we are going through what I call cyclical patterns. So maybe we're having the same conversation over and over again, or it's just we are casting the same judgment maybe on other family members. I think that's what a lot of people do to create safety and like the I'm right, you're wrong type of thing. We will say to ourselves out loud, like a verbal reminder, we are all on the same team. We are all on the same team. And that redirects what it is we're talking about, because if it's not contributing to that lens of us moving and working and shifting and languaging together in that way that we are all on the same team, it doesn't need to be said. I think so often there's just this deep need and desire to be seen and heard and validated for the pain that we have walked through or maybe still carrying, that it pushes us to fight against. And that's so often where that power struggle is actually coming from, not the actual situation. If you were to write it down in black and white, like for instance, if I'm in a power struggle with my kids over not eating their vegetables, if they didn't eat their vegetables, is that really going to like destroy them? Are they still going to be here tomorrow? No, they're going to be fine. There's no reason to be in a power struggle. But is there a story I have built up in my head that I'm not a good parent if my kids don't eat my vegetable? where I maybe am putting my self-worth on the line. Maybe it was that I was forced to clean my whole plate before I got up from the table. There's so many other pain points and insecurities I'm truly playing out in that power struggle that are more productive to sit with and look at.
I also witness a very common theme within this space and place is wanting for someone else to tell you that you're valuable. And this can be even your children, right? Or your spouse or your friends or your coworker, your boss. And when you're not having the other person give you that value, there's like a feeling that the energy isn't coming to you. And so the question even in that is, how do you shift power struggle from giving them that power over you? Because in that moment, you're actually giving your power away. So if you're trying to find value outside of you, can you pull that back in and actually give yourself that power back to you?
Yeah. And so often I think we need or seek that external validation, whether it's in a job or in a relationship, because there is, again, that need to be seen from childhood, that wound, that pain that we're carrying forward. And instead of just saying, I'm hurting, I don't see the value in myself because of all these old stories or experiences I've gone through. And that's really uncomfortable to admit because so often we don't want to say, I have a limitation here. I don't see myself clearly here. So instead, we go ahead and we look outside and we say, you didn't go ahead and tell me I did a good job on this project. I needed you to tell me how great I was. I need more pats on the back. I needed. When really that shift can only happen internally. I know I have been in so many conversations throughout my life, both on the giving and the receiver end of this, where I either didn't apologize or thought somebody didn't apologize to me. Again, I was on both sides of this, only to come to find out later on that either I did apologize or they did apologize to me, but I was not in a place of being able to receive that apology. And so here I was thinking we were fighting against something, me and this other person, but really it was an internal thing where I was fighting against myself and my worthiness to be able to receive forgiveness. And so usually when we're having these larger fights against, they are, again, these, I think we talk about this a lot on this podcast, these greater gifts for shifting, for seeing our blind spots, for integrating more of us. Back in my therapy days, I was trained under a Gestalt practitioner. And so Gestalt therapy is basically bringing all of the parts together of the whole and really saying that no part is necessarily bad or worse, but we need to bring the big picture together in order to see it clearly, in order to heal.
A tool that we are actually going to be sharing with you very soon is a boundaries workshop. I'm really excited about offering it as it relates specifically to the power struggles, because oftentimes if you're in a power struggle with somebody, it's usually because you had not set a boundary up when you needed it. And now you're not feeling seen, but it's like you're so far beyond that. Another piece of it is that a lot of times people cannot meet you in the fighting for yet because they're not there. So if you actually work on your own boundaries to that experience, you can actually invite them in to like, hey, I'm actually not going to go here with you. I'm not going to fight against you. I'm going to invite you into fighting for this relationship with me. But until you're ready, which is a boundary, right? Until you're ready to join me in this conversation, I'm actually going to step back. Actually use boundaries as a tool to help you invite someone into fighting for something versus fighting against them.
We have done that in our house for years where I got very just tired of having the same conversation over and over. And I said, listen, I see it, I hear it, I validate it. It is what it is. I'm never having this conversation again. Like, it's done. Like, I have said my piece. This is for you to go and figure out. Until then, here's your fake it till you make it slogan. We're on the same team. It can be that simple. And eventually, when you hold that space and you hold those things for yourself and you show up as the mirror, eventually there is a catch up. And I find that the catch up can happen a lot faster than people realize if you actually hold the belief of other people's change because you've seen it in yourself. It is about making that shift within, because if you're clinging to the old patterns and the old beliefs that change takes a long time, or change isn't really possible, or that person's just stuck and that you're better than them. And like sometimes we can have something called secondary gains. Well, secondary gains are like a big thing. But in this situation, our language is keeping people stuck in a lesser than role because we may have the secondary gain of getting to feel like the savior or the martyr, can say all of the right things, but you could be keeping the people in your life small because you yourself are really trying to fill your own lack. And so I see that play out a lot where people that have gone to therapy for a lot of years have actually started to weaponize therapeutic language and don't realize why the relationships in their lives aren't changing. It's because you've just come up with a more intelligent way of othering.
Of fighting with someone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see that often. I work with couples a lot and I ask, like, do you want to win or do you want to repair?
Mhm.
Do you want to be right or do you want to be connected? And I also feel like a really nice mention in this is if you're finding yourself in a relationship or in a space where you are constantly in a battle with someone of fighting against them, that it also is okay to choose to step away or choose a different road. And sometimes that's actually fighting for maybe your own joy or your own connection to yourself, right? And I think that's a really important add in is that sometimes the fighting for is actually fighting for your own peace.
Yeah, and I want to talk about repair and connection because I see this play out a lot in the parenting space where parents are really afraid to end up in a power struggle with their kids. And so we see that kind of go in two different ways where the power struggle is the child is just taking over and running all circles around the parent, or we see the parent get way too overly authoritative and they really enforce their power over the child and nobody's really in relationship in that situation. It's kind of just like two toddlers playing next to each other, so to speak. And so one of the things I'm talking about from the parent lens, but let's be real, adults are just giant children usually. What I see people really afraid is to say the wrong thing or to mess up or to end up in a power struggle because they don't know how to navigate out of it. So often navigating out of it can be as simple as I got really big and I made a mistake. It can just be the simple step of taking responsibility. It can be as simple as not necessarily needing validation or needing people to tell you you were right because that's keeping you in the power struggle, but saying, like, I want to make this right with you. I want to know what the next steps are. How can we move forward? And depending on the age of your child and the safety of the adult you're talking to, asking them that question of how can we move forward can feel really scary in itself.
Well, it's very vulnerable, even as an adult, to admit that you've done something maybe not in integrity with yourself or your child. That's a big, vulnerable, big hearted move to say, hey, I made a mistake. It is the adult's responsibility because they are the ones in the guiding role.
And that is where, too, I think it's so important when I say, like, asking how do you move forward. Again, if you're dealing with a child, they want to know that you are the one steering the ship. And if you're dealing with an adult who typically doesn't feel safe in their system, they need somebody to show what safety looks like and mirror it. So when you ask that question, how do we move forward from here? You want to be ready with that answer yourself. You should ask it to give them a moment, but you also, especially with kids, want to show that their big feeling, that this big power struggle that you got into, you still know how to navigate out of it. And that's where confidence and safety and these things are built back up. And so it could be as simple as like, listen, we got into a fight over how much TV time that was. That didn't feel good for me. Did it feel good for you? No, no. Okay, let's come up with a different way that we're going to do that because I don't want to be in a power struggle of this. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, that sounds good. So next time, what if I give you 3 warnings? I'll tell you when there's 10 minutes, I'll tell you when there's 5 minutes, and I'll tell you when there's 1 minute. Does that sound like it could work for you? Yeah, yeah. Good, good. Okay. And what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if you like start throwing stuff? I don't know. I'm going to be throwing stuff, they might say. Okay, well, I'm going to come in and I'm going to hold your arms down gently, but I won't allow you to throw stuff and destroy the room because I'm in charge of your safety and the safety of our environment, and that's not safe. Okay, okay, cool. So you know what's going to happen. You might not like what's going to happen, but at least we know that there's an adult in charge here that isn't scared by the struggle because they know how to navigate out of it. And the more that you can either internalize self-talk like that, practice that in your relationships, practice that whether it's with your kids or your spouse or whoever, the easier and easier it's going to be able to get for you to do it on the fly. I want to say this too with power struggles. So often there is an internal pressure to respond right away, right then and there. You can pause, calm down, come back to it an hour, 2 hours the next day and be like, listen, that thing that happened, I don't like it. I want to talk about it so that we are on the same team the next time this comes up. It doesn't have to be that you're some like Yoda in the moment diffusing the situation. In the moment, you can just say like, I don't like the direction this is going. I'm going to go ahead and take a walk around the block. And yes, even with kids, you can say, I'm going to go step out to the bathroom. I just need to collect myself. I'll be right back for you. I love you. Like that's okay too. With kids, it's a little different because that can create a sense of abandonment. So you got to make sure they understand that you're not leaving them to go ahead and take care of your breathing or whatever it is. I try to initial step breathe in front of my kids before leaving them in a room by themselves, but that's another topic.
We will definitely cover more of that in later episodes. I do want to say that a lot of my clients I work with have this interesting fantasy, and I think at some point in my life I did too, that I'm going to evolve one day and not have any power struggles ever again. And
how nice.
That's just not, I don't feel like that's an occasion that we can have for ourselves. I know a lot of beautiful people in my life. I have a lot of teachers that are amazing and they still enter into those power struggles. It's not about not entering into them. It's about once you've recognized, like Rachel was saying, once you've recognized that you're in one, can you take a step back and give yourself a minute to regroup so that you can find what it is that you're going to fight for?
Yeah, I turned my back on spirituality at one point because I was like, wait a minute, all of my teachers who I think are these super spiritual people, they're human? How dare they? How dare they have emotions? How dare they say things that were passive aggressive? How dare they not be perfect all the time? Like, we're here as humans. This is called the mystical human because we are always going to be humans as long as we're on earth. So let's go ahead and understand that as these things are still coming up for us, it's because there's deeper and deeper lessons and things to be learned from. And that's where I like look at the astrological charts for this. In my personal experience, I find that I am most susceptible to power struggles surrounding my Chiron. I'm also just in a very deep Chiron season. So I can pretty much find a Chiron connection in anything at this point in my life. But I find that most of my power struggles come back to I have Chiron and Cancer. So it's this idea of not being good enough, not having intimacy, not feeling seen, not feeling stood, not feeling held. I don't know, just all those things that moms face all the freaking time. And so typically if I go into like, okay, well, why did I choose to get into this power struggle? Like what was my gain for getting into this? It's because I wanted to show that I was good at that I was worthy, that I was able to. It all comes back to that Chiron and Cancer for me. I think mine's in the 9th house, which has to do with education, higher education and stuff. A lot of the times it's like, oh, I had to prove how smart I was. I had a childhood that I grew up, I was always told I was stupid. And so, of course, me oversharing in this situation that ended up leaving me in this power struggle of why don't they see me? Why don't they this? It was because I was really fighting for my own personal validation, of my own knowledge, of my own ability to hold myself and nurture myself through those childhood wounds and moments. So I think Chiron, our childhood wounds, are typically where I see the power struggles coming back to, where our triggers are.
Yes. I also like to look at people's Mars in their charts, like wherever you have Mars in your chart and see what else it's aspecting. Everything is a scale with astrology. So there's, lower octaves and higher octaves, kind of like a piano. But on the lower octaves of Mars, Mars can be what we're fighting against. And it can actually be a place where we just make ourselves very right because we're so passionate about whatever it is that the topic is. I know in my history growing up, I have Mars rules my sun. And for a long time, people would get upset with me because I would just say what I wanted and say how I wanted it. And I didn't even realize I was doing that until I had it pointed out to me. And then I was able to work with it. And now I feel like I've kind of swung the other way. But if you can look at where Mars is in your chart, that's always a good place to look as well. The invitation with this topic is to actually be able to connect with how your interpretation of power struggle comes up and how to actually be able to make a different decision in it. Last piece I wanted to highlight is sometimes the power struggles are not happening outside of you because you have a tendency towards people pleasing. Sometimes the power struggles are happening inside of you. Those can be just as potent and just as big of a deal. I have a couple of people in mind right now that I can think of that make themselves wrong for things that they're doing, and yet they keep doing them. I'm making this decision, but then how dare I make this decision, right? And so you can actually even come into that experience with yourself and be like, wow, how do I work with myself even in fighting for something? Like maybe I'm going to fight for myself to have those boundaries that we had talked about, right? Or maybe I'm going to step into my own desires more and fight for what I want.
Can you give a more concrete example? Because that's a very abstract concept where I'm making decisions to validate my wrongness, but that's like a high level of self awareness. What would that sound like most often?
Client of mine had a desire to be more connected to one of their partners in business, but every time the person in business would kind of like almost put them at a back burner, my client would actually keep getting upset with themselves for not speaking up or not asking for time that they wanted. And then they would be like, well, I'm not doing what I need. I should have said something. It's all about me. They are more important. Their schedule is more important. Look how busy their lives are. And they would just make excuses after excuses of why they're the ones that were bad and wrong, yet they still had never talked to the other person about what they wanted or what they were craving. And when we got down to it, it wasn't even that they really wanted that much. They just wanted some time outside of the business for them to be able to connect. But them getting to the place where they actually could stop making all the excuses in the world for why that person wasn't going to give them the time and actually build the confidence up to go and say to that person, hi, I would love 2 hours of your time next week to sit down and have lunch with you and just enjoy each other's company. To somebody outside of the situation, they might be like, that's just easy, go ask them. But the level to which they were in a power struggle with themselves about making themselves wrong and the other person right without even engaging in that conversation was huge for them. And so that power struggle concept can actually come up within yourself. You do want to start to understand and see, like, where do I put myself last? I see this a lot with women. And I think part of it is just in our being a woman that we just kind of are oriented towards others, but I think it's also cultural as well. And so I've moved through a lot of this in my earlier years of doing my own deeper work. But ask yourself, am I putting myself last right now? Or ask yourself, what do I need?
I think as we move through more and more power struggles, we gain more and more confidence, not only in our ability to navigate out of power struggles, but in our ability to not even get into them. Like I think back to my early career days, and I started off as a mental health counselor at like 23. I mean, I was young. I got into the industry very young. In my cohort, my group that I was on, there was one man that often got into power struggles with multiple people, but I noticed it impacted us. The younger, there was me at 23, and then there was another girl that was 25 or 26. I noticed that we would often spin out a lot more than the 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds that we were working with. And I think so much of that has to do with a lack of knowing who you are and not being able to validate it and see it. So you end up in power struggles in order to bring more of your light forward, to see who you are, see how you can navigate through these situations. And that's where that confidence, it really, like, the greater your confidence gets, the easier you are able to move through, out of, and avoid these things. In my opinion, it comes back to filling some sort of, like, every power struggle I can think of off the top of my head has to do with an insecurity. Every single one. The more we pull those insecurities out and get rid of them, the less we are in them. And how do we get rid of them? By knowing who we are, knowing where we're going, knowing where we're at, and just accepting that.
If you are finding that this topic is bringing up a lot in you, we are going to be having a membership opening soon where we will be able to actually support you in this experience. We have a lot of experience in our own lives, like currently and in the past, of moving through power struggles and learning how to shift the energy around it. And we'd love to be able to support you too.
Yeah. So yeah, today, like when I get into stuff with my kids, I don't even look at them as power struggles anymore. I'm just like, Okay, there's a little moment of evolution. Thank you for showing me part of myself. Thank you. Okay, we can transmute that to the light now. And it is such a lighter, more joyous process to bring it all full circle to the opening of this as that Capricorn full moon approaches and there's a lot of seriousness coming up. I'd also say, like, where can you find more lightness, more levity, more joy? When you find yourself in a power struggle, try this as part of your pause. Try just laughing and see where that laughter takes you because the universe is usually having a really good laugh at us. The more that you step into the role of the observer of your life, the more funny. Sorry if you guys hear my kids in the background. It's summer vacation. So we're just rolling with it. Ash just got over losing her voice. So we are just moving through things because that's the point. Life is always going to throw you curveballs, and it's how well you're able to just laugh at the chaos versus get weighed down and meet the shadow and set up a little campsite there versus pulling the shadow up with you.
I just want to note that the full moon in Capricorn is actually happening at the 29th degree, which is a really juicy full degree. So anything that you have that's aspecting that 29th degree of Capricorn, it's the 29th degree of Cancer as well. So it's like a Cancer and Leo sun with a Capricorn moon. Anything that's in any angles, so 29 degrees of any of those cardinal signs, which are Cancer, Capricorn, Aries, and Libra, that's going to be really a big experience for you. So if any of that struggles coming in, take a lot of deep breaths. Remember what you're fighting for. We're all going to get through it.
Yes. And if you want some support getting through it, we have that boundaries webinar coming up. So definitely drop your email at the link in the show notes so that you guys can be the first to find out about that launching and all the other stuff we have in the works.